I'd like to talk this afternoon actually about my dog Ezra, who happens to be at my feet as I speak. My wife and I have been married something over 40 years, 46 years actually. We've always had dogs, and we've never had a bad dog. Sometimes we've had dogs two at a time. We lost our dog Molly in 2015 due to old age, and she got to a point where she couldn't walk, and we had to have the vet come and put her down. We then took a road trip before we replaced Molly with a new dog. February of 2015, we were back from our vacation, and my wife called me and said, I spotted a dog that we need to take a look at. He's at the Ozaukee County Humane Society in Wisconsin. That's the adjoining county to where we live. And if you've ever been there, the Ozaukee County Humane Society is like a five-star hotel, only for dogs and cats. Somebody apparently left an endowment of about $6 million to the shelter, and so they've built and managed quite an elaborate facility. So we had to make an appointment to go see this dog, and I think they probably even did a background check on it before they let us take the dog home. But anyway, we had an appointment. It was for 7 o'clock in the evening, and excuse me, we were about the last people in there, and every dog has its own room with glassed-in windows and a full door. This is not a cage by any means, so we were able to peek through the window at this dog, who kind of came up to the window and then kind of tiptoed back in a corner and laid down like he wasn't quite sure of where he was or whether he wanted to greet us or not. His name is Ezra. He was shipped up from Tennessee, which I understand is a kill state. In other words, they euthanize dogs. So Ezra was under a death sentence when he went to the shelter in Tennessee. Apparently they select a few animals that are worth, in their opinion, saving, and send them up to Wisconsin in the hopes that they'll be adopted, because we're less likely to euthanize animals than the state of Tennessee. So Ezra was shipped up, probably in a panel truck with a bunch of other animals, and now we had an appointment to see him. We were in a corridor with a number of rooms opening onto the corridor, and the corridor itself was had a door on the end. So it was kind of a locked-in facility. 7 o'clock at night, we were waiting for them to bring this dog out, and I sat down on the floor, leaned against the wall, and finally they brought Ezra out. They opened the door. He took one look at me sitting against the wall, about probably 30 feet away, ran down the hall, jumped in my lap, and started licking my face. Clearly, the dog had been traumatized by the trip and what he'd been through, and he saw what in his eyes was redemption and a savior. Needless to say, we brought the dog home, but my wife didn't want to bring him into our house at night as a strange dog and leave him unsupervised overnight. On the other hand, I couldn't pay for the dog and come back the next day. That was not their policy. If we pay for the dog, we take him, or we come the next day and get in line if somebody gets in line ahead of us. So I told her, I said, we already decided to take the dog. We're not leaving without him. So anyway, the way we resolved it, we have a lake cottage, and I said, I'll take the dog, Ezra, out to the cottage tonight and spend the night with him there, and then we'll get him acclimated to the house tomorrow, which I did. I was doing some work on our cottage, didn't have much furniture in there and had no bed set up, but we have a fireplace. So me and Ezra headed out to the lake. I turned on the gas fireplace, threw a sleeping bag on the floor in front of it with a pillow, laid down to sleep, and Ezra laid right up against me all night long. I bring this up and tell this story because Ezra has not willingly left my side since that night. He's my closest companion and friend. He had clearly been a well-mannered, well-trained, well-kept dog. All of our dogs have been rescues and they've all been mutts, but Ezra's tail was docked, he had a chip in his ear, he was clearly well-trained, and he was 4 years old when we took him in. So my sense is somebody was forced to give him up against their will. Either somebody died or moved into a nursing home or had to move to a place where they couldn't take him. So we ended up with Ezra. My wife will take him for a walk in the mornings, and he's happy to go for a walk with her, but as soon as he's back in the house, he comes charging through that house, every room at a full gallop until he finds me, and then he lays down by me. When we're at the lake and he's in the yard, I may be out in the yard talking to people or whatever, and Ezra's minding his own business, chasing shadows and birds and what have you. But every couple of minutes, he will look up to make sure he knows where I am. And if I'm not in his line of sight, he'll come find me and lay down next to me. So, why do I tell this story of a dog who was under a death sentence, recognized in me hope, hope for a restored life, and a new life? Well, I tell the story because I'm a Christian, and in my world, if we're followers of Christ, the object of our salvation really is not in our church or our denominational affiliation. The object of our faith and our hope is Jesus Christ. And recognizing Ezra's relationship to me and his need to be near me, it caused me to think, what if, as Christians, as followers of Christ, we had such an understanding of what we were rescued from and such a devotion to our Savior that we could not bear to be separated from Him or to lose sight of Him. What if my relationship with Jesus was as strong and as binding as my dog Ezra's loyalty and devotion to me is? I think if we could develop that level of devotion, a lot of our lives would change quicker for the better. And I want to talk just a little bit about that. In the Bible, there's a story of Jesus, and I think you can read this in Matthew 14, starting around verse 22. Jesus sent his disciples across the Sea of Galilee in a boat, and he says, "I'll join you later." He didn't say how he was going to join them, but he went off to pray. The disciples went out in the boat to cross to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. In the meantime, a storm came up. The wind and the waves were beating against the boat, and in the middle of the night, Jesus decided to walk out to the boat, and he was walking on water. At first, when they saw him, they thought he was a ghost. He said, "You don't have to worry, it's just me." Peter, the impetuous apostle and disciple, said, "Lord, if it is you, let me come out and walk on the water and come to you." So Jesus said, "Okay, come on out." Peter started walking on the water and was doing just fine until he took his eyes off Christ and focused on the wind and the waves. At that point, he started sinking, and Jesus had to reach out and grab him. I think that it's hard for us in our day-to-day activities, with all the distractions, to remain focused on the object of our faith. And I'm trying in my old age to develop certain disciplines to do that. The first part of that is not a discipline. Really, it's an appreciation of who Jesus is and what he did for us. But if what I'm talking about makes sense, I would suggest to you that there's a couple of things that we can do. First of all, we can look to the Apostle Paul and his example of what it took for him to get closer to Jesus. And I'm in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 now, and I'm about to read the Apostle Paul's resume. This is not the resume he built in academia or in business. Paul had a blessed childhood. He apparently was of wealthy parents. He was a Roman citizen. He was educated in both Jewish and Greek and Roman schools, the best universities. Some reports have him as having been a member of the Sanhedrin, which is a Jewish ruling council, before Christ called him and he became a Christ follower, and gave up everything he had to follow Christ. Paul didn't fall back on his training or his education or his intellect. This is what he had to say about his resume. I'm in 2 Corinthians 11, reading from roughly verse 23 on. And this is what Paul had to say. This is what he considered his credentials. He said, I've worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus 1. In other words, 39 lashes was the maximum they could give for fear of killing the prisoner if they went beyond that. That happened to him 5 times. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in dangers from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I've labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I've been cold and naked, and besides all of this, I face daily the pressure of my concern for the churches. I don't think he mentioned here that at one point he was stoned and actually left for dead. So that's Paul's resume, and what does that have to do with us? Paul tells us why he was willing to not just accept this kind of suffering, but to embrace it. And he speaks to that briefly in Philippians chapter 3, where he said the reason for all this was that in suffering, he was able to draw closer to Christ. And so he willingly not just endured, but embraced all this for the unsurpassing privilege, as he talked of it, of knowing Jesus and intimacy with his Savior, sharing with him in his suffering. So I'm not exactly a fan of suffering. I don't have any particular desire to die for my faith as a martyr. I'd much rather live for it. But you know what? We live in a fallen world, and we don't always have a lot of choices in what comes our way. What we can predict is that exactly what Jesus said, in the world there will be trouble, but don't be afraid, I've overcome the world. So I'm not suggesting that any one of us go out looking for trouble, but in this world trouble is going to find us, and the trick, I think, then is how do we deal with it. And I would suggest that as trouble comes our way in the trials of life, every day even, that we consistently make a habit of turning first rather than last to God and to Christ for our strength, our comfort, our insight, and for the principles that we need to embrace to develop our character so that our circumstances cannot knock us off stride, and that we prevail. And we can do that by building certain habits of prayer and study and turning to Christ first when trouble comes. And there's something every day that's going to hit us. One other thing I think we can do if we're having a little bit of trouble with this, and because I think this is worthwhile to learn to develop a devotion for Jesus and really to keep him in sight at all times. All four Gospels record the crucifixion of Christ. Mark 15, Matthew 27, John 18 and 19, Luke 22, last part of Luke 22 and chapter 23. These are all records of Jesus' suffering and death on our behalf. The one other thing that we can do if we're having trouble maintaining a focus on our Savior and falling in love with him and developing that dependency and bond with him that my dog Ezra seems to have for me, the one other thing that I think we can do, and maybe do this from time to time to refresh ourselves, is first of all to take a hard and honest look in the mirror to understand our need, and then turn our attention to the Gospels, the record of Christ's suffering on our behalf, and come to terms with exactly what it cost to save our sorry rear ends. Thanks for watching.